In November of 2024, an important announcement quietly slipped under the radar. Bathurst Region Active Transport Strategy, or BRATS, was finally released. Now, the fake news media would have you believe that BRATSummer was already over, that it had run from June to August last year. But if you do your own research, it becomes pretty clear that BRATSummer is simply Bathurst Region Active Transport Strategy. And it's just getting started. Anyway, after 13 years, Bathurst is finally getting a new active transport strategy. Active transport is the movement of molecules or ions across a cell membrane. Active transport is basically walking, bike riding, using a wheelchair, any kind of transport that requires some level of physical effort from the person being transported. This is a chance for the region to finally take advantage of the fact that it is a true railway town and the fact that it still has a mostly intact, walkable 19th century mixed-use town centre. The optimist in me hopes that if we all leave really pro-active transport, positive comments on this plan, this could be an opportunity for Bathurst to, with its urbanism, go von Dutch. Welcome to Footpaths and Corner Stores. My real full name is Chris Topher. Make sure to subscribe to catch Brats, and it's the same, but there are 3 more bike lanes, so it's not. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to give a big thank you to my Ko-fi supporters: Alexander, Lucas, Stuart, Yvonne, Arks, Abiram, Jake, Michael, Trisha, Shareth, Joe, Ben, and Adam. Thanks to the contributions from these absolute legends, I was able to buy a 360 camera and bring it to Europe with me during January, so get excited for a few vlogs and cycling videos from my time over there. Okay, so the goals of the strategy are: 1. Enhance active transport opportunities in the Bathurst region. 2. Focus on connecting new urban developments to the existing city and, in particular, the Bathurst CBD. 3. Support the New South Wales Government's Movement and Place Framework and implement the Transport for New South Wales Design of Roads and Streets Manual. 4. Create a map outlining the future active transport network, including plans for city growth areas. 5. Develop concept designs for arterial active transport routes connecting major suburbs to the CBD and identify upgrade opportunities within suburbs and the CBD and the region's villages. 6. Set priorities, actions and cost estimates for building the network and associated infrastructure. And 7. Establish a long-term strategic plan for future priorities and actions. One of these goals, I've got to admit, I think about it all the time. But it's not the most straightforward goal of the bunch. In fact, it's the one you might look at and think, girl, so confusing sometimes. The one I'm most excited about is number 3. Support the New South Wales Government's Movement and Place Framework and implement the Transport for New South Wales Design of Roads and Streets Manual. Okay, so the Movement and Place Framework is, to simplify it so much that I might say something stupid, is basically a political compass for streets and roads. That is, it's a 2-axis graph with 4 quadrants that helps you classify different streets and roads based on their purpose and their characteristics. Specifically, the purpose and characteristics of movement and place. Movement being the speed and volume of traffic, and place being a street's particular use for civic and economic purposes. How many people will be gathering there rather than passing through. The top left quadrant is main roads. High movement, low place value. The classic example of this is a motorway. The bottom left quadrant is local streets. There aren't going to be a lot of people moving through these places. There aren't going to be huge gatherings or intense economic activity here. These places are mostly just for the residents to live their lives. Think a cul-de-sac in the suburbs. The top right is main streets, high movement and high place value. This may seem like a contradiction, and that's because it kind of is. Strong Towns, an urbanism and road safety activism group in the US, refers to these kinds of high movement, high place streets as stroads, a portmanteau of streets and roads, to kind of draw attention to their conflicting purposes. The classic example of one of these kind of places would be Parramatta Road. Finally, the bottom right is civic spaces. These are high place value, low movement value. These are places that are entirely for lots of people to come and hang out, socialize, eat, work, buy and sell things. Now within these 4 quadrants are a wide range of different streets and roads with different aesthetics and purposes and uses. And the New South Wales government actually came up with a guide that will help you identify what kind of street any given street is or road, and identify common problems with it, and then find solutions for those common problems. So for the remainder of this video, I'm going to look at a street or road in each of the quadrants in Bathurst. I'm going to figure out its type using a DORAS manual, going to find some problems, and I'm going to identify solutions and comment them on the active transport strategy map on the Bathurst Your Say webpage. So the type of local street that I'll be looking at here is the most common. It's the neighbourhood street. These streets have a relatively low volume of movement with 2 travel lanes and 2 car parking lanes. I'll be looking at the urban version since I live in the CBD, but if you live in the villages or the suburbs, click either peri-urban or suburban, depending. Now, as you can see, this image of a problematic neighbourhood street looks like a slightly narrower version of most streets in Bathurst. In fact, if we go to Lambert Street, a typical neighbourhood street that I cycle down regularly, it looks almost identical to this picture. So that begs the question, what's actually wrong with this? Well, it has a wide carriageway, which encourages excess vehicle speeds and through traffic, which is at odds with the low movement value of a neighbourhood street. It has a lack of safe crossings at intersections for people walking and cycling. Its side street intersections have large curb radii, which leads to fast movement of cars and long crossing distances. And it also has somewhat narrow footpaths, but they're not the worst offender of the street. These things are all problems because they prioritise the movement of through traffic over the people who live here having the ability to socialise, play, walk, cycle. Too much traffic on local streets is a problem because it leads to excess noise and air pollution in the places that people live. Luckily, the DORAS manual offers solutions. Where Lambert Street meets Havana Street, which is a main street, I think a modal filter is a good option. Being directly connected to an arterial attracts too much traffic to Lambert Street and also impacts the safety and efficiency of Havana Street as a main street, because the more intersections there are on an arterial, the worse traffic flows, the more complex things are, so the more likely there is to be a crash. And I have seen 1 crash and many near misses on this exact intersection, so best to just get rid of it in my opinion. Further up, where Lambert Street meets Seymour Street, which is another neighbourhood street, curb build-outs can be used to make the intersection more traffic calmed and easier to cross. Throughout the whole street, way more trees could be planted to make the temperatures better for walking and cycling in summer. I'll tell you, trees make a huge difference. And as a blanket rule, all of the speed limits on local streets should be a maximum of 30 kilometers an hour. For reasons that I don't think I will ever fully understand, 30-kilometre-an-hour streets can be a bit controversial, but if you're on the fence about them or not quite sure, just have a look at this graph. It explains them really well. Once you hit about 30 kilometres an hour, any increases in speed offer marginal cuts in travel time, and once you limit speeds below 30 kilometres an hour, the lower risk of pedestrian death is also marginal. So 30 kilometres an hour is kind of that sweet spot where you've got low danger to pedestrians and cyclists, but also low impact on travel times as well. It is also a great maximum speed and also the fastest acceptable for mixing cars with bikes. It's the maximum speed found on Dutch fietsstraten or bicycle streets, where biking and walking are the main forms of transport and cars are guests. Aside from the 30 kilometre an hour or lower speed limit, one of the main features of fietsstraten is that they use modal filters to make sure the only traffic on their streets is local traffic, whether that's residents or if it's a shopping street, delivery vehicles. These kind of modal filters, curb build-outs, lower speed limits should be applied to every neighbourhood street. Obviously that's a big ask, so prioritising them on designated active transport corridors would be ideal, but they could all be implemented very quickly using paint and garden beds. And then as the roads get repaved, they could be made permanent with more long-term landscaping and architecture options. All right, let's have a look at main roads, the opposite end of the movement spectrum to the local street. This quadrant is especially important for Brats because one of their stated goals is to connect surrounding suburbs to the CBD. The type of main road we'll be looking at here is the rural highway. which is the primary connection between towns and cities. For this type of road, it's very important that people who live in the suburbs or the villages leave their comments, because I live in the CBD, so my experiences with these roads are not going to be as important as the people who want to ride and walk into the Bathurst CBD but are limited in their ability to do so because of the infrastructure. That being said, there are still plenty of destinations outside the CBD that I would like to be able to access by bike, so I will have a look at the roads limiting me from doing that and leave my comment about that. One such place is Boundary Road Reserve, a great nature reserve with some really good walks and one of the few pockets of nature that is really close to the Bathurst CBD. Unfortunately, its main access point is via the A41, which looks uncannily like the common issues picture on the Movement and Place website, and it has no walking and cycling provision. A shared path is, in my opinion, the most important treatment for this road because it would allow people to walk and cycle with no danger. The safety of that shared path could be ensured with a self-enforcing road environment that includes pedestrian refuges that allow people walking and cycling to safely access this hypothetical shared path. The Civic High Street. A vibrant street maximising space for civic enjoyment at the heart of a community's social and cultural life, offering people a high quality public domain for walking, shopping, playing and cultural activities. Every self-respecting town has one of these places, from the bigger cities like Wollongong with Crown Street to Lithgow with Cook Street and Dubbo with Church Street. Mildura has Langtree Mall, even Broken Hill has Chloride Street, and Bathurst has nothing. So what exactly specifically is a civic high street? Well, it is a place that is for pedestrians with motor vehicle access as a 10km/h shared zone or restricted to service vehicles. Every street in Bathurst, except for a few laneways, not only has but also prioritises motor vehicle access. Creating a civic space, in my opinion, should be a high priority for the active transport plan. But it may also encounter some reactionary opposition from people who are obsessed with retaining parking spaces. A 6-month trial with modal filters and benches and temporary trees and furniture implemented could be a really good way to measure the sales and profits of shops before and after the civic space was implemented, to really get some evidence about whether or not the removal of parking does hurt these businesses. Generally, when pedestrianisation is implemented in areas of high economic activity, especially areas that already have high pedestrian activity, it is really good for the businesses in these areas. But people always like to say, oh, our area is different, so maybe, a trial would help put those worries at ease. Now, where would this civic high street go? Leave a comment on the active transport strategy or even this video with your own opinions about where you think it should go, but I'm going to share mine. Personally, I think William Street between Howick and Durham would be a great candidate. It's one of the main centres of civic life in Bathurst, and the removal of on-street parking here would be a drop in the ocean in terms of the actual parking available in the area. See, there are 3 shopping centres with multi-level secure car parks that I have never seen full that all open up onto this part of William Street. Whether it is William Street or elsewhere, though, Bathurst really does deserve a civic space as its beating heart, and it's really important that we acknowledge that in the active transport strategy. Finally, main streets. We are now up to the trickiest type of street to wrangle, the Arterial High Street, which is a movement spine through the heart of urban communities. When it comes to mixing place and movement, some will say that the apple is rotten to the core. And indeed, the duality of functions in a constrained street reserve creates a challenge to balance amenity and safety for all users, especially people who stay and walk. However, there are ways to improve these spaces. I'm going to have a look at Havana Street, specifically where it intersects with Keppel Street, because it has higher place value there due to the train station, the pub and the railway museum. Havana Street I found a difficult street to classify. It only just meets the criteria for an arterial high street, and honestly outside of this intersection with Keppel Street it would probably be classified differently. Now the main issues with Havana Street are high vehicle speed from arterial routes continuing through the area and road space prioritising the through movement of vehicles. A lower speed limit would go a long way in making Havana Street safer and more pleasant. The speed limit is currently 60 kilometers an hour, way too fast. It should be lowered to 50 at the highest. We could consider 40 past the train station and the pub. Curb extensions at intersections are desperately needed. At places with angle parking on both sides, the road is 20 meters wide, an insane task to cross this kind of chasm. Everywhere else is 12 meters, which is still pretty wide, and at intersections we could use curb build-outs to make sure that the area of the road that needs to be crossed is only about 6 meters wide, which would cut the crossing distance in half. Footpaths should also be built where they're currently missing, especially near the train station where lots of people are going to be walking to and from with potentially wheeled luggage that is very difficult to carry around without a footpath. So those are a few examples of the kinds of comments that you could leave on the Bathurst Regional Active Transport Strategy map using the Design of Roads and Streets manual. I have applied these to streets in my local area of Bathurst that are important to me for getting around, but I have no doubt that everyone else is going to have their own streets that they think could be improved for walking and cycling. So identify those streets, figure out where they sit on the movement and place framework, figure out what type of street they are, and leave those comments with all the solutions that you can think of. A lot of the comments on the BRATS map currently identify problems really well, but they're unfortunately just not being very ambitious with the solutions. That is why it's really important that we have a quick read of DORAS, because that does offer solutions that will genuinely change the way that our streets and roads are used for the better. They'll make them safe for active transport in meaningful ways, rather than just tinkering around the edges. So make sure that you do give the manual a read and use some of the ideas there, because these are the ideas that have been proven to work. Now, if we all come together and leave our comments, active transport in Bathurst can go from just being okay to a place that you can ride and walk 365. Oh, that hurt me to say. Okay.